Welcome to episode number 145 of the LSR podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me, I have one of those minds in Dustin Gowker. You can follow him on the Twitter machine, and you should. It's free at Dustin Gowker on the Twitter machine. If you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. We are going to hit on a very near and dear subject to both of our hearts to kick things off here, but a little bit later, we'll talk some numbers. We will talk some Maine sports betting stuff. We will talk Missouri, Maryland. But Dustin, let us kick things off here, my friend, with Adrian Wojnarowski, who, listen, is amazing at his job for what he does. He breaks news like nobody else in the National Basketball Association. He is trusted by coaches and players and front office people and all of that, and he is great at that. However, and we have seen this, he's not the first guy to do it. He might just be the most high-profile guy to do it in this manner, is we see these guys kind of step outside of their lane, and then they get in and start talking to sports gambling stuff and whatever. And you can tell when people, one, probably aren't gamblers themselves, two, aren't very familiar with the industry themselves. And Woj certainly made that quite apparent this week.
Yeah, so here's the backstory, and this set everybody on fire in the sports betting Twitter and around. So what happened was Woj was talking about Kyrie Irving going back to Boston and getting accosted by fans. No shock there. And then somehow he makes this really fairly unnatural segue into gambling and the effect of that on in-person betting. Now, people have tried to say, he's not saying that this happens in Boston or Massachusetts, but that was
right.
The entry point into it. It's super weird, right? Like we know why Kyrie's getting accosted. And then he starts saying, gambling and in-game betting and all this more action that's happening at live events is going to make for a toxic environment for people who are attending games. And I'm just not sitting here and going to buy that. There are about 1 million things that are creating toxic environments at sporting events, including alcohol,
yes.
Just the breakdown of society in terms of us being nice to each other. Gambling for me is like number 10 on the list of things that can make a toxic environment in it. So the thing that really bothered me about this is we're still in this world where people are somehow pretending that sports betting didn't happen until real recently, right? Right. People have been, in New York and Boston, especially big cities, people have been getting down their local bookies forever. For the last couple decades, you could bet offshore at Sportsbook. This is not yes, there are way more people betting now, but there's not like there weren't a ton of people betting pre all of this legalization. So this idea that somehow there's this critical mass of people who are betting and it's going to make for, it's going to create dangers for athletes. Man, I just don't buy any of this. And yeah, it's this is Woj going from the way I listen to this segment, some GM or somebody saying to him, I think this is what's going to happen with gambling. We're getting into it too fast, which is arguably correct. But that this is not the reality on the ground. And yes, there could be this one-off of some idiot who has a bet and goes on the floor or something. That could happen. That danger's always been there. But I just don't buy. And I'm certainly curious on your opinion on this. That gambling is all of a sudden going to change the experience in any sporting arena or stadium in the U.S.
Yeah, as you said, first and foremost, and again, he didn't necessarily say in that arena or whatever and all that. But again, as you mentioned, legalized betting isn't even available in Massachusetts where this game took place in the first place. So there is at least that kind of underlying in the whole thing. Secondly, as you mentioned, yes, the major thing that makes people act like pricks at games is booze. You and I, listen, me more than you, I drink and I gamble. And I can assure you the thing that makes anybody around you act in a different manner more than gambling is alcohol and booze, and because it just changes your state of mind. So yes, that. 3, he never even mentions fandom in this whole little rant of his, which, by the way, if you're going to give one side, you need to give the other side as well. If you've ever been to a sporting event, the completely sober person who does not have a bet at all but is decked out in their jersey and their hat, and they've got their every single thing they have on is because they live and die and breathe that team and all that. that creates people acting crazy and out of their minds and stuff all the time as well, because you just get sucked into that fandom and you go crazy and you go nuts and you do these different things. And listen, another thing that never gets brought up, and this is more of a macro statement in all this with this, fan stuff, and everyone wants to blame gambling. You know what they never bring up, Dustin? No one ever brings up fantasy. And the thing is individual performances is what fantasy is all about. It is not the actual team performance. It is individual performances. And listen, you and I both know prop betting, while we assume that it will get bigger over time, we assume that it will, become bigger part of handle and all that things for these books. It is a microscopic part of what's going on with these businesses right now. So the individual player performances of these guys and things like that, because he mentions, I had you to score more points in the second quarter than this guy and you didn't do it and all this. And it's like, that actually makes more sense in fantasy than it does in sports gambling. And again, no one ever wants to say anything negative about fantasy sports because, it's been around for a long time.
And that's not a new trend, right? Like fantasy football, especially, like people have been accosting players on Twitter and
for years,
years and years. This,
yes.
Even before DFS, right? And just in general, people. And then DFS came along, and then I think, again, we're talking mostly social media here, but I'm sure it's just as much of a problem in that's just as much of a problem in an arena or stadium too, right? Like where people are just bitter about their fantasy teams, right? Like, again, this is the whole thing is this is so contrived. This is not a new problem either from fantasy, from sportsbooks or whatever. It's again,
and again, I don't want to say that it's unique to a specific sport, but we need to bring up as well. Basketball is the only sport of the major sports where you're right on top of the players, right? Like if you've ever been to a football game, you've had the guy next to you screaming at the quarterback of the other team. He just can't hear the guy because you're so far away from him. And in baseball, you can't hear the guy whenever you're screaming at the center fielder. The guy's way out in center field. You can't hear. But at basketball, it's just a unique circumstance where you are right on top of the court. Like you're right next to the players. They can, if there's, kind of quiet in the arena, they can hear you and whatever. So again, like you're saying, none of this stuff is new. It's just unique to one, this very specific circumstance. Two, Kyrie Irving being a very polarizing figure as it is anyway in the town of a team he used to play for. I mean, there's just all of these things that lead to this specific incident, and then to paint it with this broad brush that gambling somehow is going to make this all worse is just it's a weak argument to begin with, and honestly, it's just a lazy argument.
Yeah, and that's the part about Woj. Just we know he's not lazy, right? And he's trotting out what is a very lazy argument about how gambling intersects. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say we have more people gambling. That just makes it more
Absolutely.
likely we're going to get a gambling incident. We're going to and all of the other things, alcohol, people being on top of fans. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not more likely that we get some idiot going on the floor because he lost a prop bet. That's certainly, but it's not creating this whole ethos of a more toxic environment for NBA games. That's just nonsense. It's just not true. Anyway, I was if we had done the podcast today, that story came out, I would have been even more angry. My anger has simmered, but just do a little bit more. Yeah. I mean, it feels like Woj just rehashing something he heard from a GM or somebody. And and he really paints it broadly. He's like, yeah, I've heard this from a lot of players and people in the NBA. And where are they getting this from? Again, people have been yelling at them for poor performance or related to betting and not for
way
a long
before
time.
Yes. Right. Way before sports betting was the thing.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. I'm not buying this again. There can be incidents that seem to prove the thesis, but even that doesn't prove the thesis. There's a lot going on that, you want to make fan environments better, get rid of alcohol. That's your number one step, right? Which is, we all know, is never going to happen because they make infinity money selling alcohol at NBA and any other sporting event because it's $15 a freaking beer, right? So
it costs them 50 cents and they charge you $15. It's a pretty good business model. So yeah, man, it's this deal where you and I and anybody else in this industry that is a little bit more plugged in, that lives and breathes this stuff. Whenever we see someone, more than anything for me is when Woj says something, it makes headlines. And so he says something like that again, is, in my opinion, a little bit careless, a little bit reckless to say, painting that broad stroke, broad brush stuff going on here. But people pay attention to what he has to say. He's an authority figure. He's a dude that people carries a bunch of clout. And so when he says something like that, it makes headlines and people read that. And then we all know how this works, Dustin. You and I know. People read headlines, and that's just the truth, so they read a headline. Wojnarowski says betting is making fans act, horrible towards players, and they're like, they go to the water cooler the next day and go, can you believe this? And blah, blah. It's like that's the biggest problem for me with all this is there is at least a tiny bit of responsibility, I do believe, on these guys that carry so much weight in the sporting industry to at least do a little bit more research and get a little bit more of a foundation for these kind of opinions that they're going to throw out.
And again, there's pushback from the betting media like us, right? But that's we have just so much of an audience. The rest of the sports world picks up on this. Even SI, which is has a Sports Illustrated. This is the story that I first saw this run. They pick it up and it's like, oh, this is the worst thing in the world. Yes, Woj is absolutely right. Like SI has a sports book. They're rolling out a sports book. They have sports betting content, and they're just parroting this too. So the level of nuance on this, and we're sitting here ranting on nuance here for 15 minutes. We have a fairly limited audience here, like people who care about this stuff, yes, but like the wider audience is exactly going to see Woj saying gambling's bad. That's now the truth, I guess, probably, because we have no nuance to anything that we have, especially when it comes to gambling and all of this. And all my final take on this is obviously Philadelphia fans' fault somehow. That's all. I know that with my heart that it is our fault somehow.
One last thing here, Dustin. I would like to say that I would like to thank Woj at least just a little bit, because he did bring our part of the industry and hashtag sports betting Twitter. It might be the first thing that everyone's been like lockstep on ever, like in something. It's like, so if he did do anything, you and hashtag sports betting Twitter actually were on the same side for something.
Yeah, we're all unified. Like, there's probably someone out there with a contrarian take, but we all pretty much agree this is nonsense.
Guys, again, everything we talk about here on the podcast is over on Legal Sports Report, so be sure and head over there. And then, of course, subscribe, rate, and review, whether you're watching this on YouTube or if you're just hearing the audio version. We do appreciate the support there. Dustin, let's talk some numbers here, specifically over on the East Coast in Pennsylvania and New York, and then maybe let's hit Michigan as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. New York just dropped this morning because we get the weekly stuff, but it's interesting. We get New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Michigan all at the same time. These are all interesting comps because they're similarly sized states. They have online casino too, and it's becoming clear to me there's a little bit more disparity, and the numbers are interesting to me. So the big headline here: PA hits $1 billion in lifetime revenue for operators. That's not revenue to the state, but that's relatively new industry. That's how much money Pennsylvania has generated from a gross revenue standpoint, again, not net and all that, but that's how much bettors have, in theory, lost or paid in rake and vig over the time that Pennsylvania has had it. So we're getting numbers from March: $700 million in handle in March in Pennsylvania. New Jersey gets to $1.1 billion in handle, and Michigan just under $500 million in March, something like $477 million. So this is really interesting to me. I mean, these are not all similarly sized states, but exactly the same in population, but the fact that Michigan is still trailing kind of badly on just pure amount of wagers is fascinating to me, and I'm not sure why this is. It's something I think we're going to get into as we get these more mature markets, but it's fascinating. New Jersey, which is I think the smallest of the states in terms of population, is still we know why. It's been around longer. It has more options. It's a really good environment for operators, and then Michigan like less than half on the same thing. And New Jersey did this without, famously not allowing betting on St. Peter's with its run in March Madness and all of that. So I don't know. It's a top level story. I mean, lots of money being wagered, and Michigan just kind of again being similar to these other two markets, but still relatively new. This is year and a half, or almost about a year and a half in. But it just feels a little weird that we've seen in New York, which you said, like a lot of adoption of sports betting really quickly. In Michigan, doesn't seem like it's been adopted just quite as much. And I'm not sure if I can put my finger on why that is right this second, but it's an interesting data point, and one I'm sure we're going to get into more. And just again, every state is different. Every state is a snowflake. It's not like you roll sports betting out, it's the same everywhere. Like there's these differences in how markets have, and it's probably a good case for like, what, we should have a more homogenous system for how, because there's no reason Michigan should be really trailing that much, but it is. So anyway, interesting data with the numbers that have come out this week.
We have friends in Maine. We're big in Maine, Dustin. I don't know if you know. You're huge. We're huge in Maine, and we have some good news for our people that are listening in Maine.
Yeah, I feel like this is Groundhog Day, right? In Maine, like we talk about Maine every year, it doesn't get done. It's like a lot of states, right? But so we saw the Senate pass a bill, concurred, and then the House concurred an amendment. So this looks like right now, it's not quite there, but it looks like it's heading to the governor. And this is the governor's chosen way of doing things, giving tribes in the state exclusivity over gambling. This will allow for online gambling as well, but and there's also retail betting at some other places in Maine, but it looks like we're gonna have Maine sports betting now. I feel like we've probably said this before with Maine. It got to this very last step, and then at one point, was it just recently? And it just died and went away, and didn't happen. And it's interesting because this is like the old bill that we had seen progress on before and almost got to the finish line, allowed for a more open commercial environment, allowed for more online sports betting brands, and this is going to be fairly limited in how it rolls out to the tribes. I believe 4 tribes that are in Maine. So anyway, good news, bad news. Good news, looks like hopefully we'll have sports betting here in Maine, not too distant future, and bad news, not quite the optimal market, and I don't think that's going to throttle what's going to be done in Maine, like we see in a lot of places, like if you're artificially throttling how you do things. But this is at least you're going to have a legal option, and you're not going to be able to quibble with that. You'll probably get something. You'll get some good options to bet in Maine, and that's an exciting prospect. If the governor, it gets to the governor and it's signed, which we believe it will.
As always, we will close things out with some quick little state updates. What's going on in Maryland, and do we think we may have good news in Missouri at some point?
Maryland continues to be a cluster. I think that one's a recurring theme on this podcast, right? We have another meeting in Maryland about how things are going to roll out, and as we sit here, we don't nobody knows what's going to happen with Maryland sports betting, like when it's going to launch. Like we're now 2 years in from the referendum, and we don't know what's going on with a launch date. We kind of suspected that they would launch by NFL season. Right now, I don't see any way that can really happen. It's hard to believe that with how slow this process is, and we're not really anywhere with any of this. So it's really strange. This is obviously by far the slowest rollout of sports betting we have had anywhere. Yeah. And again, we don't even have a launch date. So, I have bad news for you there in Maryland. Hopefully they get their stuff figured out, and we have it real soon. But as we sit here, not looking good for even a launch in 2022. Missouri, seemingly good news. Headed to the Senate floor. Could be a vote on it as soon as Monday by the full Senate. Would then go back to the House, need to be concurred with any changes that are made in the Senate. So, not much time left in here in Missouri. In anything, things can go haywire real quick. So, Senate adjourns May 13th. We have heard somebody in the state say they believe it will move and get some movement on Monday when they come back from a recess. So looks good. There's also this dynamic with Kansas, Missouri, having a little bit of a one-upsmanship, and they both seemingly want to have sports betting. They don't want one to have it and the other not. So it seems there is some kind of give and take with that, where the states are trying to make sure they both get it, and they don't want to be beaten out by the other state. So hopefully that gets you both, and you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan. You're gonna be gambling somewhere, maybe by NFL season. Kansas has said if they get their bill finally passed, could be launched by September in time for NFL season or shortly thereafter. So good news if you're in Missouri and Kansas. These are the best options we have right now for legal sports betting to get legalized here this year, and for a launch either later this year or early next.
Head over to Legal Sports Report, guys, if you want some more information on what's going on with Fanatics. There is something that may or may not be that looks like to be going down with them, so be sure and check out that article, see what BetMGM has to say about where they stand in New York. And you can also look at Ontario getting another player there looking to launch with a sports book in Ontario as well. All those articles up over at Legal Sports Report, so be sure and head over there and take in that information. If you want to follow Dustin on the Twitter machine at Dustin Galker, and of course, as we always say, subscribe, rate, review. If you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead, hit that subscribe button as well. Let us know in the comment section if there's anything that you would like us to cover here on the podcast. And finally, open invitation forever to Adrian Wojnarowski if you want to come on the podcast. Dustin and I will talk to you about all of this stuff. We will try to explain to you why that opinion, we're not going to say you're wrong. No opinion is wrong. It's your opinion, but we will at least combat that opinion with some of the stuff that we feel is a little bit more factually based. And so open invitation. Hey, if he can't do it until after basketball season's over, Dustin, that's okay with us. He can still come on.
I mean, anyone who wants to come on the podcast. I'm not going to say every last person who asked me to come on the podcast.
Yeah.
We have some pull here. We can get you on the podcast. You know.
Yes.
Dave Portnoy wants to come on the podcast. Come on down. We'll have that in our little neck of the woods. Sure. But yes, Woj, come talk to us about sports betting.
Our DMs are open. Just go at it. Appreciate it, guys. For Dustin, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.